Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Kemi Badenoch might be more politically astute than I've given her credit for. She's done a few things recently which seem to tie in with the idea of at least understanding some basics of politics in a way her predecessors and leadership rivals haven't. But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So I might be accusing the person who might be the next Tory leader of having some political ability here. A remarkable thing to say after the last few years. But Kemi Badenoch's finally started to do some interviews as Conservative members vote on who they think will be slightly less ineffective than Rishi Sunak. And she's made the point of saying that Robert Jenrick's framing of his policy to leave the ECHR as a leave or remain debate risks reopening old Brexit wounds and could result in the Tory party ceasing to exist. Interestingly, she thinks it will be the Lib Dems who will take over as the official opposition, not Reform UK. And along with a few other things Badenoch's been doing and saying, I'm starting to wonder if maybe she's not as daft as she makes out. Or she's hired actually a decent advisor. See, first of all, whether she's definitely right or wrong, there would absolutely be a risk to the Tories of trying to turn the debate on the European Convention on Human Rights into a natural extension of Brexit. Mama Brexit already brought the Conservative Party to its knees. Baba Brexit could risk finishing them off. This is because, just like Brexit, leaving the ECHR is something which divides the right wing. The ideal divisive policy to pursue in politics is one which divides your opponents but unites your own side. This one mostly does the opposite. Many Tory MPs, many Tory members, and definitely many Tory voters will be divided on whether the UK should remain signed up to the human rights laws that it proposed and persuaded almost an entire continent to adopt. It's literally one of the country's greatest contributions to the world, and Robert Jenrick wants to sever that connection. And although it divides the Tories and their vote, mostly unites everyone else. Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP, the Greens, Plaid will all defend it to the hilt. Reform UK will all unequivocally rather say we should leave. Unites everyone else. It's a policy that causes a major headache for Tory party unity and absolutely no headaches whatsoever for their opponents. It's exactly the sort of policy that any advisor worth their salt would tell their political masters not to touch with a barge pole. And after a bizarre couple of weeks, I have to confess to wondering if Badenoch is maybe more astute than I've given her credit for. Like, you take her report, which caused a lot of outrage, which not only misidentified autism as a mental health issue, but also suggested that people with autism were somehow winning at life because they get all these resources at school. It's brilliant, isn't it? It's like, I viewed this comment and I sort of suggested it's a bit like complaining about someone who had a broken leg. What did they get their meals brought to them in bed? This sounds brilliant, having a broken leg. It's like, no, sometimes people need more resources to get the same access to life as others. Quite a lot of Tories don't seem to get this, but plenty of the public do. And predictably, there was a bit of a public backlash to these statements. So what did Badenoch do? She claimed she'd been misrepresented. Oh no, it doesn't really say that. That's not it. Even though the news articles were quoting her reports exactly. But it is a classic political trick. You say one thing to one audience, it's what they want to hear. You know it appeals to them. But someone blabs it to the other audience, in this case the wider public. So then you say, oh no, it's not, that's not quite true. No, that's been misrepresented. Politics is essentially about getting the widest possible support. And that means trying to be not all things to all people, but most things to enough people that you need for success. Which means inevitably you have to be very ambiguous in politics because you need people with very different viewpoints to think you're sort of on their side in every particular area. So although what Badenoch is saying about issues such as autism, which she clearly knows nothing about, she thinks it's a mental illness, the political game she played was fairly standard, quite unlike anything her predecessors have been doing over the past few years. Then we look at Badenoch's statement that framing the ECHR issue as a Brexit type issue, which it is, but framing it that way poses an existential threat to their party. It shows a level of perception missing from a lot of Tory leaders in recent years. let me try and put it simply. So right now, the Tories don't have enough voters to win an election or even get close. That is the position they're in right now. They are also looking at a voter base which is much older than for other parties. So the net effect is the Grim Reaper is not their friend. They stand to lose a significant number of voters to death by the next election, way more proportionally than other parties. So they need to win more votes. They need new voters, people who didn't vote for them before, to suddenly start voting for them. And they cannot really afford to just casually lose existing voters unless it's to chase after a much greater number of new voters. Leaving the ECHR is not an issue that has a great deal of saliency to it at the moment. That is to say, very few people think it's important enough to base a general election on. They may have an opinion on it, but it's not the sort of thing that's featuring in their general election voting. And there are lots of policy issues like this, that voters have an opinion on almost everything, but only so many will impact their voting decisions. If Jenrick makes maintaining or leaving the ECHR his main policy, he will make it more salient, particularly to voters on the right. And that means there will be some right-wing voters who are fervent supporters of the ECHR who will not vote Conservative if this policy is adopted. A good number of them will vote for the Lib Dems. And it doesn't really matter whether this proportion of right-wing ECHR defenders is large or not. It's definitely above zero. And it is almost certainly greater than the number of Reform voters they will win back. After all, winning back Reform voters is really hard anyway, especially on the back of a policy that they also support. Because think about it this way. Nigel Farage, let's say he perceives that it's cutting through and Reform voters are going, oh yeah, they're going to leave the ECHR. Yeah, let's vote Tory to do that then. Nigel Farage will claim you can't trust the Tories to deliver on leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. And he will say, look at the way they mucked up Brexit as proof. Jenrick would really struggle to take votes away from Farage on this issue. But there's another problem as well. It would also solidify support for Labour and the Lib Dems. Tactical voting is already established in the UK now. It was very well organised, very professional this year. And tactically voting against the Tories to stop them getting the mandate to leave the ECHR will be another reason to vote tactically for many people. Strategically, it's hard to think of a dumber policy that the Tories could adopt than leaving the ECHR, and making it your number one policy seems like the stuff of madness. And that Badenoch seems to see this suggests that she is capable of clearer strategic thinking than many of her colleagues, or at least has better trusted advisors. What was odd, however, was how she said it would be the Lib Dems who will take over as the main opposition, but also that this was a reason to win back Reform UK voters. Now, this makes less sense. If you identify the Lib Dems as a serious threat, as she is doing, and this is something the Tories just didn't do during the election, then why not target Lib Dem voters? You know, I keep saying if you take a vote from your main rival in a first-past-the-post system, it's worth 2 votes because you reduce their tally by 1 and you boost your own by 1. So you close or extend the gap by 2. The Tories only lost 4 seats to Reform UK, but they lost dozens to the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems are challenging the Tories in easily, far and away, more seats than Reform UK. Now, ideally, of course, you would try to win over both Reform and Lib Dem voters, and indeed anyone else who left your party. But this is too difficult. The only things that unite Lib Dem and Reform voters are wanting to see better public services, which is not really something the Tories are all about. So it's really a choice. The Tories need to either lurch further to the right, in which case they may win back some Reform votes, but will also risk losing even more Lib Dem or Green or Labour. Well, it may be Green, but particularly thinking Lib Dem and Labour votes. Or they tack back to the centre, in which case they can pick up Lib Dem and Labour votes, but effectively abandon the Reform UK votes. And the maths says that it's easier to target on the centre-right because you can adopt more credible policies. And there are more of those votes available. It should be a no-brainer. Yet Badenoch says she needs to target Reform voters, at which point I'm thinking of 3 possibilities. First, that Badenoch appears to be performing some standard politics more as an accident of maybe having at least one decent advisor around her, rather than it being something that she is actually good at. Second, it could be that Badenoch understands some of the basics of politics quite well, but is limited in her understanding of the breakdown of voter types, and that would be understandable because there's no end of influential Tories talking absolute claptrap about why they lost the election. Or third, it could be that Badenoch will talk a good fight on winning Reform voters back because that's what the party thinks they need to do, but really she thinks to herself, I'm actually going to target those on the centre right, just as anyone who understands data would, and she is an engineer by trade. Finally, I did put out a poll earlier asking, if the Tories did collapse, hurrah, what sort of right wing you would most like to see. Most, I will say, though not a majority, but most seem to prefer the Conservatives remaining the dominant right wing party, but in the fashion of John Major's Conservatives. So it's just the current incarnation of the Conservatives you would want to see crash and burn. So it looks like there is some affection for a Conservative party with some principles, it seems. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.